Young Turks now has audio, the TYT Audio Network, podcasts of some of your favorite shows and new shows, including one with Nina Turner, former Ohio State Senator. She's going to do We the People with Nina Turner, talking about equality and justice and seeing that through the eyes of regular Americans who are affected by politics and policy. Everybody check it out at tyt.com/audio.
What in the end will end up happening to Paul Manafort? He is in jail right now. He's awaiting 2 different trials. But Donald Trump has recently been thinking about pardons quite a bit, thanks to Kim Kardashian. And so there's the possibility that Donald Trump will get involved. Rudy Giuliani, who is Donald Trump's lawyer or spokesman or bro, I don't know at this point what formal role he holds, but he was talking about this today and he said, when the whole thing is over, things might get cleaned up with some presidential pardons. And Donald Trump was asked about this earlier today, and he said that he didn't want to talk about it, but that he thought that Paul Manafort had not been being treated fairly, and he's previously said that he would use pardons to make things fair. Not necessarily specifically with Paul Manafort, but you can theoretically connect the two.
I think this is scary because the charges that Manafort is facing aren't, directly tied to this Russia investigation. So if he pardons Paul Manafort, it sets a precedent that he's going to continue pardoning. He started small. He started with Sheriff Arpaio. Thank you. And he's slowly moved up the ladder. Dinesh D'Souza. Now, if he pardons Manafort, it's not that disconnected. He's slowly entering this world of like, okay, well now I'm going to pardon people that are directly associated to me. Now I'm going to pardon people who are directly associated to the investigation. I think it's a terrifying precedent if he pardons him.
Even so, Jules, I think you're being too soft on him. No, look, there's no question about it. New York Daily News, in one of the stories that I read, bothered to talk to a bunch of former federal prosecutors, criminal defense attorneys, and they're like, well, you can't read Giuliani's mind. If he has intent to obstruct justice, then it would be obstruction. But without that, it probably is not obstruction. But it certainly seems to be a signal that, hey, Manafort, even though you're in prison, hang in there, we're going to pardon you. To which I say, of course, of course. Then why would Giuliani say that when the whole thing's over, we might get cleaned up with some presidential pardons in regard to Manafort? He's clearly, obviously, for any sane human being, telling Manafort, don't worry, don't flip on us because we're going to pardon you. It's like the first time ever that the head of a criminal organization has the power of the pardon. I mean, can you imagine if the mob boss could be like, hey, Donnie, hang in there. Don't worry about it, okay? I'll pardon you. But
is that Chris Christie you're doing?
I don't know what that was.
And the ironic thing about this is that Manafort is going to jail for witness tampering. He needs to take some lessons from Donald Trump on witness tampering because he did it through a private encrypted app, whereas Donald Trump just does his witness tampering out in the open. Through his lawyers. He does it during tweets. He does it constantly. And I think that's maybe he's found a legal loophole for that. But it's just another example of him setting this kind of culture at the top of his organization. I'm not surprised at all that it's finally starting to catch up with them.
Trump himself, when asked about whether he would pardon Manafort and Cohen, said, I don't want to talk about that. No, I don't want to talk about that. If he left it at that, that's totally fine. But he continued, but look, I do want to see people treated fairly. That's what it's all about. So when asked if he would pardon this particular guy, he said, I want people to be treated fairly. Might as well have added a giant wink to that. Look, only people who think that Giuliani and Trump talking about pardoning Manafort doesn't have to do with protecting themselves are people that are wildly disingenuous or maybe work in the mainstream media and have to go, oh, he says this and she says this, and what would I know? What am I, a reporter, right? But even the MAGA guys, you know what that's about. It's not about something else. It's not about a plumber. It's not about a dentist. They're saying, hey, we'll pardon you. Don't talk. Which, by the way, for the first time, I've never been sure that Manafort had anything on Trump. I'm positive Michael Cohen has things on Trump. He was panicked when Michael Cohen had his stuff that was seized, et cetera, et cetera. Carter Page, there's good reason. There's it's varying degrees of what we can guess from the outside based on publicly available evidence. But now, Giuliani coming out, Trump hinting at it, and then Giuliani just flat out saying, we'll pardon you. Means, that he talked to Trump and Trump said, he's got terrible stuff on me. Make sure he doesn't flip. He's in prison now. Make sure he doesn't flip. Promise to pardon.
Yeah. And I think, I understand that there's probably some people, there's a certain percentage of Americans that either think that talking about possible pardons is too esoteric or too inside baseball, or they don't really care about Paul Manafort specifically, or maybe they don't care about these investigations more broadly. They think you're focusing too much on what's going on in Washington. Why are you talking about this? But I think that we are at an incredibly important point in our country with huge possibility for precedent to be set in the future. If you care about any oversight or consequences for what presidents do, what governments do, you can rest assured that right now, every other politician in the country is waiting to see what's gonna happen with Donald Trump, because we all say the president can do this, or the president can't do that. All of that is hypothetical, and it only means something if there are consequences when they take an action we say they can't do. And I'm telling you right now, when it comes to pardoning Manafort or Flynn or his son or himself, the Republican Party will do absolutely nothing if he does it. So I don't care what a DOJ memo from the 70s said or what the Constitution has to say about it. From the Republican Party, there will be zero consequences no matter who he pardons and what he pardons them for. And if he is allowed to get away with that, there will be no consequences for any president for any action for the rest of time. And for progressives, that is not a state that we can allow to come about. And so even if Paul Manafort bores you or frustrates you, or you think that we talk too much about Trump, if you care about the future and holding future politicians accountable, you cannot afford to stay silent on this issue. You cannot afford to check out on this issue. You have to make your voice heard. You have to make sure that there are consequences if Donald Trump does what he is apparently promising he's going to do.
And this is one other reason that's why it's so important that we flip the House of Representatives to Democrats, because Democrats will then have investigatory power over the Trump administration, subpoena power. We need to get to the bottom of this. I don't trust the Republicans that are running Congress right now to do anything about that. And the people deserve answers. This is the most powerful, this is the man that runs our country, one of the most powerful people in the entire world. And we need to get to the bottom of so much of this.
2 easy ways to follow the Young Turks. One is hit the subscribe button down below. Then you're a TYT subscriber. And second is ring the bell. And when you do that on YouTube, you're notified of our videos.